Ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another day of Jeopardy! I will be your host, Jeremy Carballo. I will also be the participant for today since my roommate, who cannot be named due to privacy reasons, could not make it today. Okay, can I see England's history for 400? Of course. What is England's favorite hobby? The United Kingdom tried to take over Ireland for the first time in 1170. The English did not have success in their conquest until the 1540s, though. The conquest ended in 1603 when the Gaelic chiefs and lords in the north were defeated. The so-called Plantation of Ulster was established in 1609. The land that was left by the lords was colonized by citizens from England and Scotland who spoke English and were Protestant. This is very important, because the native Ulster Irish residents were Catholic. The Ulster Irish Catholics were now the minority population and always ready for a rebellion to take back their country. So 2 centuries passed, and during that time was the moment of emergence for the path-dependent process of Catholic and Protestant conflict, because control of the island was still uncertain. In 1801, England dissolved the Irish Parliament and assumed control over the whole island. This was the moment of crystallization for the path-dependent process of conflict. Until equality or resolution occurred, the Irish and Catholic would remain in conflict with the Unionists and Protestants. So around 100 years passed, lots of stuff happens, and now it's the early 1900s. Over the next decade, Irish nationalist paramilitaries, mainly the Irish Republican Army, fight an effective war of independence against the British military. It comes to an end when Ireland was partitioned in May 1921, and Northern Ireland was created as a province of the UK. The Anglo-Irish Treaty was signed in 1921, and the treaty left Northern Ireland as part of the UK, but the southern part became the Irish Free State, later known as the Republic of Ireland. The Northern Ireland government needed to rely on force to remain in power. The United Kingdom did not take into account that there was still a sizable nationalist population that wanted Northern Ireland to unite with the Republic of Ireland. In the first decades after the partition, Catholics in Northern Ireland were ostracized from political life and did worse materially than their Protestant counterparts, although this improved into the 1950s. Okay, fast forward a decade, conditions were still not perfect for the Catholics in the 1960s, but 81% of them believed their local government would treat them fairly. All was looking peaceful and fun. I mean, a Protestant and a Catholic could probably get drinks together and the IRA wouldn't bomb the pub, but this wouldn't last for too long. The Catholic middle class was so frustrated that their voice was not being heard, and they no longer wanted the side of the violent nationalist movement. They tried peaceful means of getting their demands like anti-discrimination and gerrymandering met, and the United Kingdom government seemed receptive. But the Protestants did not like this. This positive support for Catholics produced backlash amongst Protestant Unionists. In October 1968, the troubles began when a peaceful pro-Catholic civil rights march resulted in the police beating the protesters and injuring more than 100 people. Marches and countermarches on both sides turned into bombings and executions. By the following year, the British had deployed troops to Northern Ireland, eventually returning to direct rule. Okay, it's 1980 now, and the British changed their strategy. Instead of siding with the Unionists in Ulster, they meet with the Irish Republic to figure out something different for the northern problem of terrorism and Catholic discrimination in politics and economic life. The Irish Republic's long-term interests also changed, as they no longer seek the united Ireland, but rather seek economic prosperity. The Anglo-Irish Agreement is signed in 1985. Both the Irish and the British were appeased because the British recognized that, number one, the Republic of Ireland had a credible stake in Northern Ireland, and number two, that the Unionist majority was guaranteed the right to veto unification with the South. The Unionists, in effect, had a peaceful recourse to the wants of the Catholics. This could be considered a critical juncture, as the path-dependent pattern of conflict was giving a peaceful solution. After 6 years of the Anglo-Irish Agreement and the peace had somewhat been established, the Irish and the British began to meet again to figure out a final solution for the constitutional problem, meaning that they had to figure out how to please three actors: the Unionists, the Catholics, and the Nationalists. The Unionists wanted the United Kingdom to have more control of Northern Ireland. The Nationalists wanted to unite with Ireland, and the Catholics just wanted equality. In 1993, violence erupted again, and the British tried to change the beliefs of the IRA by releasing a statement in which they said that the IRA's justification for violence in Northern Ireland, that of British imperialism, was not valid. The British claimed that they only wanted to achieve peace for the province. The IRA responded positively and declared a ceasefire in August of 1994. Unionist paramilitaries also declared a ceasefire. As we see, the Unionists ceasefire because they had an expectation that the IRA would commit to their ceasefire as well. The Troubles ended through the Good Friday Agreement, which was signed in April of 1998. It was the final peace agreement signed between the government of the United Kingdom, the government of Ireland, and the invested parties in Northern Ireland. Notably, it was a pair of two agreements. The first was between Northern Ireland's political parties, and the second was between the government of Ireland and the British government. The Unionists were pleased because the Irish government amended its constitution to affirm that Northern Ireland was sovereign territory of the United Kingdom. The Nationalists were pleased because the agreement left the unification of Ireland an open possibility for the future, and the Catholics were pleased because institutions were created to protect them. Now that we understand the main actors and decades of conflict that led to the Good Friday Agreement, we need to explore what factors pushed the ethnic conflict away from violence and towards negotiations, compromises, and peace agreements. Patterns in social behavior are considered path-dependent if they have been developed over time and are now seen as trajectories that are difficult to reverse. To categorize a pattern as path-dependent, we have to do four things. We have to know exactly what pattern is being reproduced. In other words, have to know the behavior that is being reproduced. Number two, we need to identify the critical juncture, meaning the point when the path was locked in, the action or set of actions that we're taking in order to lead to that specific process that is difficult to reverse. Number three, we need to know which beliefs and norms are set in place that allow the process of repeated behavior to continue. Number four, we need to identify how the norms, beliefs, and expectations that feed the process can be altered. Specifically, there must be a recognition that exogenous forces are able to change behavior, but that endogenous forces lead to incremental change of behavior. Ethnic conflict is path-dependent because it consists of number one, high setup costs, and number two, learning, coordination, and anticipation effects within a community. Ethnic dominance feeds into social political institutions, which then feed back the repeated outcomes to the ethnic groups. The social political institutions create a path-dependent, short-term outcome of violence, because once the violence has been embedded in a variety of institutions, the behavior is no longer a single occurrence, but rather makes the initiation of conflict, and number two, the mode of conflict, a shared and repeated behavior by both ethnic groups. This establishment of repeated behaviors is what makes settlements difficult to achieve. So how did the locked-in process of conflict create a critical juncture like the Good Friday Agreement? The answer is that all of the factors needed to reach settlement were present alongside the appropriate temporal context. The four factors or incentives needed for settlement are: number one, changing power relations in terms of ethnic conflict. A power imbalance leads to conflict, while power stalemate provides an incentive for settlements of conflict. There must exist a credible expectation that if one party weakens their resources through an agreement or compromise, the other party will not attempt to exploit this weakness. Number two, there must be a change in cognitive frames. The ethnic groups must understand that there is a potential win-win situation. Number three, there must be an active civil society and social networks. They are able to lessen the propensity for conflict, but they do not explain the move from conflict to settlement. They just redefine how conflict operates. That's because of two reasons. They replace ethnic and national politicians with organizations that survive off people power, and they set up communal boundaries that are not always perfectly defined, but they are able to constrain the choices that actors face every day. Number four, there must be institutions present that give opportunities for compromise settlements. But the effects of each incentive onto settlement depends on two things: the absence or presence of other incentives, and the historical context that signifies when an incentive is most effective. Understanding what factors are important is only the first step. We then need to figure out when they are going to be most important. So why did the incentives work this time in the Good Friday Agreement? What changed? Well, there was a change in the context that the settlement operated. Northern Ireland's path-dependent patterns are a result of long-term political development. If these political factors are able to be changed, then we can alter the pattern. This is where we see the historical appreciation come back into play. Nationwide political trajectories have the capacity to influence the ethnic group's patterns because the long-term political trajectory impacts the endogenous, short-term outcomes of ethnic groups. Exogenous shocks and geopolitical changes are important because they open windows of opportunity that can only be taken depending on actors' preferences and power distribution. Irish conflict was driven by a system of relationships that emerged at historical moments and then were reproduced over time. Path-dependent systems always have a moment of emergence and crystallization. In other words, the framework for an institution consisting of actors, beliefs, norms, and expectations was established after the Ulster Plantation. The lock-in moment of this framework or institution was established when the British took full control of the island and later on Northern Ireland. The past context was a pattern of violence embedded in the system of long-term, path-dependent relationships. This was changed through exogenous geopolitical shocks that fueled slow, endogenous changes in the ethnic groups. Exogenous shocks also changed the preference of actors and accelerated the slow process of statewide political change.